Hey, welcome, everybody. My name is Dr. Matthew Camp. I'm Director of Government Relations and Community Engagement and running the TC Take Action initiative. So happy to host our third and we think final public service loan forgiveness workshop. It's so great to see so many people. We've had this for faculty, staff, students, alumni, and this I think is actually our biggest one. We are joined by some really notable, awesome people to help us navigate the public service loan forgiveness process. We've got Rachel Harrington from the Office of Financial Aid. Hey, Rachel, who's going to help us field questions. You can drop your questions into the chat anytime over the next hour. Rachel will be aggregating those, and we are also joined by Denise Bonita. Hi, Denise, who's head of graduate student life, and each of them will just say a couple words that you might find interesting and helpful before we get started. And of course, Amy Salata, who's Director Outreach and Advocacy Manager at the Student Borrower Protection Center. So again, welcome. We have some good news since the last time we talked. The state of New York has passed a bill that makes it easier for borrowers, basically would make 30 hours of work considered full-time for the purposes of public service loan forgiveness. So that helps a lot of people who are right in that margin of part-time and full-time. It does other things that are helpful, I think, also to teachers. So we'll follow up with more information about that. All the other good news since our last workshop, I don't know if it's cause and effect, but the Biden administration has announced that student borrowers could have up to $10,000 forgiven, and if you're a Pell Grant recipient, up to actually $20,000. I think Amy will touch on some of those updates since this is a quickly moving field. So I do want to introduce Rachel Harrington. Would you like to just maybe say hi and any updates from the world of financial aid our students might be interested in?
Yes, the exciting world of financial aid. So welcome everyone. I'm Rachel Harrington and I am the Assistant Director here in the Office of Financial Aid. I know we're going to talk a lot today about public student loan forgiveness, and I wanted to mention to those of you out there that may have loans coming in for the fall term, that the disbursement for those loans actually takes place today. So if you are looking at your student account and you don't see your loans applied to your fall balance yet, they're going to be applied today. So I just wanted to throw that out there for everyone. Just some good news.
Good news. Thanks for sharing that. And Denise from the Office of Student Life.
Perfect. Thanks, Matt. Hi, everybody. My name is Denise Bonetta. I do see some familiar names, so it's good to see folks. I just wanted to remind everybody that GSLD sends a weekly newsletter every Monday. And so in there, we try to capture any funding opportunities available around the college. And then in the chat, I just want to remind everybody, especially if you're a new student, that the Division of Student Affairs has two funding opportunities for students in need. We have an emergency student fund, and then we also have a fund called the HEF Fund, which also supports students in times of need that isn't covered by the emergency fund. So I'm going to go ahead and throw those in the chat. But outside of that, just looking forward to the conversation.
Nice. Thank you so much. And Amy Salata, I'll introduce, is looking for share screen access. I'm having a little trouble doing that. Maybe Denise, who's probably more adept at this, could help out as co-host. So Amy Salata is Outreach and Advocacy Manager, Student Borrower Protection Center. And previously she was research analyst at 32 VJ SEIU in New York City. Prior to her work in SEIU, she was heavily involved in research and activism around wage theft in the greater Denver area. And she was also part of the sanctuary movement in Denver. She graduated with a master's degree in international studies from the Corbel School at University of Denver, and has a bachelor's degree in English and Spanish from LaSalle University of Pennsylvania. And again, this is her third workshop with the Teachers College community. We're so grateful. Thank you, Amy, for joining us.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Amy Salata. I'm the Outreach and Advocacy Manager at the Student Borrower Protection Center. And for those of you who don't know, we're a national nonprofit policy organization that's focused solely on alleviating the burden of student debt in the country. And we do this through a mixture of policymaking, advocacy, and litigation strategy to rein in industry abuses, protect borrowers' rights, and advance economic opportunity for the next generation of students. So to get started, let me just share my screen very quickly. Okay, awesome. And yeah, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll try to get to as many as possible at the end of the presentation. And with that, I can't give specific legal advice if you have very particular questions about unique situations, but I can give general program information, and I think a lot of your questions can be answered by the presentation and also by any questions that we get at the end. So with that, let's get started. So I know that the bulk of this presentation is going to be about the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program and the waiver that's in effect right now. But I know top of mind for many folks is the cancellation announcement that just happened a couple weeks ago. So I wanted to devote a minute to this. So President Biden announced that the Department of Education will be canceling up to $20,000 in student debt for people who used a Pell Grant to pay for college, and up to $10,000 in student debt cancellation for all other federal student loan borrowers, so long as the borrowers earn less than $125,000 per individual per year, or $250,000 per household. There will be an application process, and that will be in place before January 1st, 2023. We're hearing rumors that it'll be around in early October. And then we are awaiting more detail from the Department of Education on what this will look like. And so we will share any updates that we have on our website and on a website, which I'll share with you as well. It's called forgivemystudentdebt.org. It basically runs through this presentation and has like shorter videos that are kind of this presentation if they're more digestible for people to get. And it also has frequently asked questions on both the PSLF waiver and on this cancellation announcement. And so we will be updating that regularly based on any information that we get, but also studentaid.gov is really going to be your main clearinghouse for information on cancellation and information on the PSLF waiver, and that's the Department of Education's website. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to be mentioning that website a lot today. But so this cancellation announcement is a really historic announcement that will provide critical relief to millions of people struggling with student loan debt, with as many as 20 million people seeing their student debt wiped out completely. And with proper implementation, this announcement is a truly meaningful step toward alleviating the burdens of student debt and providing life-changing relief to millions of federal student loan borrowers. But critically, we at the Student Borrower Protection Center, believe that this is just a start. More is needed to end the student debt crisis, and we'll continue to work on fixing our broken student loan system in light of this announcement. So let's get started on the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. And let's start by talking about how it was created and how it functioned until very recently. Congress created the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program in 2007 as a means to help public service workers who are struggling with their student loan debt, and also to ensure that future students and graduates wouldn't be deterred from entering the public service because of their student loan balances. And to put it simply, PSLF is the promise that if a borrower works in public service for 10 years and makes payments on their loans for that time, the remainder of their debt will be forgiven. But as you'll see, and if you're here, I'm sure you already know that it's a bit more complicated than that. So first, I'm going to explain how the program works, and then what some of the issues with the program are and were, and then how you can benefit from the current waiver period to access your own public service loan forgiveness. So how does PSLF actually work? More than simply working in public service for 10 years, there are normally 4 specific criteria. First, you need to have a direct loan. That's one of several federal loan types. Second, you need to be in the correct repayment plan, which for the program is generally an income-driven repayment plan. Third, you need to work in the public service field. And then finally, you need to make 120 qualifying payments or 10 years worth of payments on your loans. So let's review some of these in greater detail. So only direct loans qualify for public service loan forgiveness. Direct loans have been the main federal loan type since 2010. So if you took out a loan since 2010, it likely qualifies. If you have an older loan, a federal family education loan, the acronym for that is FFEL loan, or a Perkins loan, those do not qualify. What you can do though is you can consolidate those loans into a new direct loan, which is like refinancing with the federal government, and it pays off your old loan and replaces it with a new loan. Under the normal program requirements, when you did this, you lost any credit towards forgiveness that you had gained because you're essentially taking out a new loan when you did that. But that's not the case during this special waiver period. So it's important to know that many people were blocked out of the program strictly based on their loan type and having nothing to do with their years in public service. Second, your direct loan needs to be in the right repayment plan, which is generally an income-driven repayment plan or an IDR plan, as an acronym. It doesn't matter how much you're paying, just that it's the right plan. And these names, these plans go by names like income-based repayment or IBR, income contingent repayment or ICR, pay spelled PAYE, and then repay spelled REPAYE. Some other payment plans in certain instances can also qualify, but in general, you want to be on an IDR plan. Third, to get public service loan forgiveness, you have to work in public service. And the focus is on your employer, not on your role. You could work at a government organization, so that includes most city, state, federal, and tribal employees, or a 501c3 nonprofit, or certain other nonprofits. You also have to work full-time, which is defined as 30 hours a week, or whatever your employer deems as full-time if it's greater than 30 hours. And the 30 hours can be with more than one employer if you have multiple part-time jobs that add up to 30 hours a week. So that's also possible to cobble together employment that way. Finally, you need to make 120 qualifying payments, which are payments on the right loan, in the right repayment plan, and during the correct employment. And the payments have to be made in full and on time. And if you leave public service and then come back, you can continue accruing credits and you don't need to start over. So the payments and the time in employment doesn't need to be consecutive. There have been some impacts of COVID on the public service loan forgiveness program. So first, for those loans that are getting the payment pause, those that are owned by the federal government, each month of suspended payments counts towards PSLF loan forgiveness, towards the 120 total payments that you need in order to achieve forgiveness. However, you still need to meet each of the other criteria, and the most relevant criteria here is the public service employer. So now we'll talk a little bit about what has changed in the program and why. As you may already know, the initial rejection rate for the program was 99%. Only some 800 applications out of 90,000 were approved, and folks are getting denied because they had the wrong repayment plan or they didn't have the right type of loan. And it had nothing to do with whether or not they did their 10 years of public service work. And as you can imagine, this was a huge problem and an incredible failure for all of the people that PSLF was meant to support. Many folks took up debt to become teachers or nurses or government attorneys, specifically because they had been told that after 10 years of affordable payments, the remainder would be forgiven. And so to find out that that wasn't true, was really upsetting, understandably. But some good news is that last summer, the Department of Education, for the first time ever, opened something called a request for information. And basically, they asked borrowers to tell them about their experiences with PSLF. And so this was an opportunity for borrowers who had worked in public service for 10 years, but who were going to get locked out of the program because of the bureaucratic program criteria, or for someone who had delayed retirement to get extra qualifying payments, to finally ask the Biden administration to to fix the program once and for all. And so there was a huge response to this RFI. 50,000 people commented, and they essentially all had a common thread that was, that this program really isn't working for the people that it was meant for. So within weeks of this request for information period ending, the Department of Education announced a special waiver that would address many of the issues raised by borrowers during the RFI period. So for limited time, the Department of Education will retroactively grant credit towards PSLF loan forgiveness to borrowers for months that previously didn't count for the program, either because they had the wrong loan or they weren't in the right repayment plan. So we'll walk through these changes now. Essentially, what the department's waiver does is give public service workers credit towards loan forgiveness, regardless of what type of federal loan they have, for any period of time since October 1st, 2007, when the program began, and as long as they were in qualifying public service employment and their loan wasn't in default, deferment, or forbearance. So even for months in which borrowers didn't actively make a payment, as long as their loan was in repayment status, they can receive credit. And these credits will be retroactive. So borrowers can receive credit for past payments that were previously ineligible. So in short, for any month since October 1st, 2007, that a borrower had any type of federal loan, worked for a qualifying public service employer, and wasn't in default, deferment, or forbearance, that borrower can receive credit toward the 120 months required for loan forgiveness under PSLF. Now, one thing I want to mention here is that as with PSLF, the income-driven repayment program has also not lived up to its promises of delivering debt relief for folks. In April of this year, the Department of Education announced that it would review the IDR process and count some periods of forbearance and deferment. So this means that if you've had a forbearance up to 12 consecutive months or over 36 cumulative months, those will count towards PSLF credit, as will any deferments that you had prior to the year 2013. So what it means is that in some cases, periods of forbearance and deferment will count towards PSLF credit, towards PSLF forgiveness. And we're still awaiting additional details from the Department of Education on this IDR account adjustment. But the good news here is that this will only mean more qualifying payments for some borrowers as a result of the reconsideration. No one will lose credit because of the IDR account adjustment. One thing to note is that this waiver is not completely automatic. So normally PSLF requires that borrowers have a specific loan type, a direct loan, as I mentioned. And although the waiver allows borrowers with any loan type to get credit, those without direct loans must take some additional steps to convert their loans into direct loans through a process called consolidation, though they still will get credit for time before the conversion. And then almost all borrowers, regardless of loan type, will have to certify with the Department of Education any periods of qualifying public service work since October 1st, 2007. And the idea here is that if the federal government doesn't know when you had qualifying work, it can't award you the right number of credits. So one other thing to keep in mind is that the department's waiver only lasts until October 31st, 2022. So this means that if a borrower must change their loan type through consolidation or certify their public service work with the Department of Education, they must do so before this deadline of October 31st, 2022. This does not mean that everyone will receive their new credit by this deadline, just that the paperwork on the borrower's end must be completed. And credits will be given on a rolling basis, and the department might take more time beyond this October 31st deadline to process everyone. But if you get credits from the waiver, those credits are permanent. And if you didn't receive enough to meet the 120 credit requirement by this deadline, you can still continue to accrue more credits after the deadline, just adding to those that you received during the waiver. So with this in mind, there are 3 things that all public service workers with federal student loans should do. So to figure out what steps you need to take, every borrower should do these 3 things. Confirm your past and present employers are qualifying public service employers, determine your loan types and consolidate your loans if necessary, and then certify your employment with the Department of Education. First, confirm that you have a qualifying employer. Nothing about this requirement changed during the waiver. You still need to work in public service, except that for during the waiver period, you don't still need to be employed at the time that you apply for forgiveness if you have over 120 payments. Remember that qualifying employers are any level of government, so that's federal, state, local, and tribal, any nonprofits that have a 501c3 tax-exempt status. Certain other nonprofits also qualify. However, unions and political organizations do not. So any organization that has a tax status of a C4 will not be eligible for PSLF, and nor will any for-profit employers. If you're not sure whether or not your employer qualifies as a public service employer for PSLF, the Department of Education maintains a list of qualifying public service employers that you can search. It's important to note, though, that this list is not necessarily exhaustive. So if your employer does not appear when you run the search, but you still believe that you work for a qualifying public service employer, you can still proceed with the PSLF process. You can access this list by using the PSLF help tool, which is where we're going to spend a lot of our time today. And this is available at studentaid.gov. The employer database is the first step in the help tool, so you can quickly access it to check your past and present employer's status. I know that we have mostly teachers on the call, and so, you know, teachers in general usually qualify for public service loan forgiveness because you work for an independent school district or you work for a 501c3 school. But we really like to hone in on what is qualifying employment, because you might have past employment that might also qualify that you're not thinking of at the moment. And so that's why we take our time to really explain what is a qualifying employer. And so I'll probably mention this again later on, but wanted to flag it here to be thinking about past and present past employment that you've had since 2007 that might also qualify. So what type of federal loans do you have? The three major loan types that most folks today have are federal family education loans, or FFEL loans, direct loans, and then Perkins loans. For public service workers to get loan forgiveness for their FFEL and Perkins loans under the waiver, they'll have to consolidate their loans into direct loans. Remember that what's special about the waiver period is that normally when you consolidated your loans, you lost any past credit you had gained towards forgiveness. But during the waiver, you can keep that past credit and add it to the new consolidated loan. The final step that all public service workers with federal student loans should do is certify their qualifying employment with the Department of Education. Remember that qualifying employers are any level of government, 501c3 nonprofit employers, and certain other nonprofit employers. The form to do this is called the PSLF form, but it was previously called an employment certification form. So if you filled out one of these forms in the past, it would have been called an ECF, but now it's called the PSLF form. It's the same form. I just want to flag it for people that might have already applied for PSLF at a previous time. Borrowers should certify their employment using the PSLF help tool, which is the same tool that you can use to check to make sure that your past and present employers are eligible. The tool will generate the form for you, which your employer will then have to sign. So we've just discussed the 3 steps that all borrowers should take to make sure they benefit from the waiver period. And now I'm going to briefly show you some step-by-step instructions on how to do all of this. And we'll start by confirming that your employer is PSLF eligible. You'll need to log into studentaid.gov to do this. So if you don't have your login information, there is a way to reset it and gain access. And once you're there, you're going to hover over Manage Loans located in the top toolbar, and then click on Public Service Loan Forgiveness in the drop-down menu. You'll see the PSLF help tool there, which you should click to launch. Borrowers can look up all of their employers since October of 2007 in the help tool by entering their tax employer identification number, or EIN, and then also your dates of employment. And you can check your employer's EIN by looking at your W-2, by asking your employer, or for some larger employers, you also might be able to Google them. If your employer appears when you run the search, your employer is a confirmed public service employer. So you should proceed to the next steps of checking your loan types and then consolidating if necessary. If your employer, if your employer does not appear, you could still be eligible, as this list isn't exhaustive. It could mean that no one else from your organization has ever sought PSLF in the past. So don't be discouraged by this, especially if you work for a government agency or a 501c3 nonprofit and you know that you're eligible. So some eligible employers will show up as ineligible. Once you've determined whether your employers are eligible, you should confirm what type of loans you have. This can be really confusing and many folks don't necessarily know. So to see all of your federal loans, you'll log into studentaid.gov again. There's a dashboard there that lists your loans. Any that say direct are direct loans, and any that do not say direct will have to be consolidated. So for a more granular list, you could also download your loan data, and you can see how to do that on this slide. Now, this is what the dashboard will look like on studentaid.gov. So you can see the current balance and then little arrows to the right that break down the type of loans you have. Here you can see that this person already consolidated their loans and they already have direct loans. So once you're on this page, you'll be able to tell which type of loans you have, and you only need to worry about the loans that have a balance. So you can see the other types of loans, the categories at the bottom here, like Graduate Plus loans, Perkins loans, but they all have a zero balance. So you don't have to worry about those. You just need to worry about the loans that have a balance and determine whether or not they're direct, or if they don't have the word direct next to them, they'll need to be consolidated. Now, if you have non-direct loans, you'll need to consolidate them. So to consolidate your loans, you'll log into studentaid.gov again, hover over Manage Loans in the top toolbar, and then click on Consolidate My Loans in the drop-down menu. This is what the consolidation application will look like. It'll then guide borrowers through next steps that you need to take, which include selecting which loans you want to include in the consolidation, confirming the amount and rate or the interest rate of the new loan, and then selecting your payment plan and servicer and signing for the loan. Here's a tip specific to the waiver. If you have a mix of older and newer loans, so some would be closer to the 10 years and need it for forgiveness under PSLF, if you consolidate all of the loans together, the new loan will be awarded as much credit towards forgiveness as your oldest existing loan. So if you consolidate old and new loans, when the new consolidated loan is ultimately forgiven, the entire amount will be forgiven. This is really useful for folks who have older FFEL loans, but also newer direct loans. You might not think to consolidate your direct loans because they already technically qualify for PSLF, but if you do consolidate them, they could be forgiven on the same timeline set by your older FFEL loans. And the same is true if you have multiple direct loans that are from different periods of time, like if you have a direct loan from undergrad and also a direct loan from graduate school. If you consolidated them, they could all be on the same timeline set by the oldest loan. Remember that for the regular PSLF program, you need to be enrolled in an IDR plan. So when you're consolidating, it's a good idea to select one of the IDR plans as your payment plan. And again, some of the names for these include income-based repayment or IBR, income contingent repayment or ICR, pay and repay. And these payment plans within income-driven repayment are all different. And there is a payment calculator tool that can help you choose the best plan among these four that's right for you. So finally, let's review how to certify your employment. Just like confirming that your employers qualify, you'll need to log into studentaid.gov. We're going to hover over Manage Loans and then click on Public Service Loan Forgiveness. And we'll go back to the PSLF help tool here. This is really the tool that is the most used throughout this presentation. Okay, so you'll remember this step from earlier. It was the first step in the help tool. So here's where you can add your employers using your EIN and also the dates of your employment. And then the PSLF help tool will guide borrowers through the next steps, which include identifying which loans you want to include in PSLF loan forgiveness. Once you complete the tool steps, it will generate a form for you that you can use to certify your employment. Again, this form is called the PSLF form, but it was formerly the ECF, the Employment Certification Form, and this is the form that you must submit in order to get the benefits of the PSLF waiver. Once you have a PSLF form, you'll need to have any employer you are claiming as a public service employer sign the form. And once the form is signed, you'll submit it to the designated federal student loan servicer for processing to make sure that you get the maximum benefit that you qualify for. Everyone must submit a new form that reflects all of their qualifying public service work by the October 31st, 2022 deadline in order to benefit from the waiver. If you worked for a nonprofit that is now closed, or if your employer is refusing to sign the form, there is a box to check on the form that one of these is the case. So if these are issues that people are experiencing, there are ways around them. Obviously, best case scenario is that you can get a signature on your form, but if you can't, you can check that box. And then we also recommend submitting a W-2 when you do that so that you can, the Department of Education can easily verify that you worked there during that time period. When you send the forms, you can send the forms via fax or via mail. The fax and address will be listed on the last page of that form. If you're going to do either one of those things, it's a wise idea to get a receipt. So if you're going to fax them, request a receipt when you're sending that fax, or if you're going to mail them, we recommend sending them via certified mail so that you know that they are received. Finally, one other thing I want to mention here, just because it just happened, so much is changing these days, but Fed Loan Servicing announced that it's ending its contract with the Department of Education. They were previously the exclusive servicer for the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. A new company is taking that portfolio, and this happened just last week. This company is called Mohila. So if you were already enrolled in the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, you likely had Fed Loan Servicing before because they were the exclusive servicer, and now your account should be transferred to Mohila if it already hasn't been. So I just want to flag that for folks who may have already submitted PSLF forms in the past and might already be in the system. So what's the process for getting forgiveness? This is the general process, but it also applies to the waiver as well. Borrowers seeking PSLF need to send their PSLF forms to Mohila, which will do a preliminary review of loan eligibility. If you have a qualifying loan, your loan will then be transferred to Mohila for processing, at which point it will run through the other criteria such as employment and qualifying payments. Unfortunately, there have been a lot of problems with people finding out too late in the game that they thought they qualified for PSLF, but then something had gone wrong. So for this reason, we recommend that you submit a PSLF form as soon as you're interested in public service loan forgiveness, then do it every year until you qualify for forgiveness, and then do it every time that you switch public service employers. You don't have to do this. You could document everything after 10 years, but this is a great way of catching any mistakes that are made and dealing with them as they come. The Department of Education has stated that they are continuing to review PSLF cases on a rolling basis. So there is no exact timeline for when you might receive notification from them that your application was accepted. And something that we know right now is that so many people are applying for PSLF under the waiver, and that number kind of continues to grow with each passing day, given that the deadline is October 31st. And so it may take a little while for them to process your application. So before we get to questions, we'll just talk about some common issues that borrowers have had with the waiver and how to address them. When you submit your PSLF form, it's important to make sure that the form is easy to read. If your employer has written over or tried to correct anything on the form, you should request a new clean application from them. Often, if anything is crossed out or written over, like in this picture, your application could be automatically denied or it could be delayed. And so it could save you a lot of time if you just request a clean application from your employer. When borrowers complete the PSLF help tool, many people are tripped up by this. So the form suggests that a borrower must take their loans out of administrative forbearance under the payment pause, stating the following under the subheading, get out of forbearance or deferment. This can be a bit confusing. So because the student loans were placed into administrative forbearance under the payment pause, and pause payments continue to count towards PSLF eligibility, borrowers do not need to stop postponing payments in order to make qualifying payments. Although the form goes on to state that a borrower does not need to remove their loans from the payment pause, we understand how this language can be confusing. If you choose to use the PSLF help tool to complete your application, many borrowers are unsure on how to proceed when they get to the question on this slide. If you think that you've already made over 120 qualifying payments, the PSLF help tool might not let you choose that option. It's a glitch in the system. So this is okay, just ignore it and choose no, I haven't made 120 payments. Regardless of which answer you choose at this question, your account will still be reviewed in full by the Department of Education. Finally, from what we have seen, notices with inaccurate PSLF payment counts have been one of the biggest sources of confusion with the waiver and with the help tool. So if you're consolidating an older FFEL loan in order to take advantage of the PSLF waiver, you will receive a letter from the servicer stating that the consolidation is complete and that you have one qualifying PSLF payment. Don't worry when you receive this letter. Here is what is actually happening. This is an auto-generated letter that is hard-coded to review under the standard PSLF program requirements that we reviewed at the very beginning of the presentation. So when you consolidate your loans, you'll be asked if you're doing it to take advantage of PSLF. Since you are consolidating for the purposes of PSLF, you'll say yes, and after your consolidation is complete, MOHELA will then notify the Department of Education, who will review your account to determine how many qualifying payments you've made towards the PSLF waiver. You'll then receive a second letter saying how many payments you have made towards the waiver. As I mentioned before, this process can take a few weeks to a few months to complete, and the Department of Education does these in batches, so there's no concrete timeline for when you might receive notice from them. Okay, very quickly, before getting to your questions, let's review some important takeaways from this presentation. So, remember that credit will be given for months during which any loan type was in repayment status. In addition, some periods of forbearance and deferment will also count because of the IDR account adjustment announced in April. So that means that if you've had forbearances up to 12 consecutive months or over 36 cumulative months, those will count, in addition to any deferment that happened prior to the year 2013. And remember the importance of this statement about having a loan type in repayment status. So the loan had to be in repayment status, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you had to make a payment during that time. So if you missed a payment, or if you had an incomplete payment, or it wasn't on time, that is also possible under this PSLF waiver. Remember that the deadline to apply is October 31st, and by that deadline, you have to have all of your paperwork completed. So if you have to consolidate your loans into direct loans and or submit your PSLF forms, you have to do that by this deadline of October 31st. And then follow the steps of the presentation in this order. So first, confirm your employer is eligible, and particularly your past employers. If you have past employment, that might also count. And then confirm your loan types. And if you don't have direct loans, consolidate your loans into direct loans. Submit a PSLF form for any qualifying employer that you are trying to get credit for since that date of October 1st, 2007. And then file a complaint if you experience any issues. There are essentially three options for this. You could file a complaint with the Department of Education's Federal Student Aid Ombudsperson. You could file a complaint with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. They have a student loan ombudsperson as well. And then you could also file a complaint with the New York State Ombudsperson, which is in the Department of Federal Services, or I'm sorry, the Department of Financial Services, I believe, in New York. And we keep a list of ombudspersons listed out by state on our website, which I can also share with you later if that's helpful. But okay, that was a lot of information. I'd love to hear some of your questions, and thank you for your attention. I hope I didn't bore you too much on this Tuesday afternoon. But
no, you didn't. Thank you so much, Amy. That was so thorough. Really appreciate it. I think maybe even some of the questions that came through were answered due to your terrific presentation. So just a couple of notes for people. We will have this presentation and the recording available to everyone here who registered, because there's a lot there. We'll follow up with you. I do want to mention a couple other quick things as Rachel gets us ready for Q&A. Today, right at 3 o'clock, we'll have a Get Ready to Vote workshop hosted by TC Take Action. Really important to get ready to make sure you're registered to vote. Today is National Voter Registration Day. So there's a link for that in the chat. I encourage everyone here to register for that. You might have questions about absentee ballots or something like that. And then in the last time we did this workshop, we took action with regard to messaging the White House to keep this kind of thing going, because the Biden administration has kind of made good on this promise, but there's more work to be done. So there's a link in the chat on how to write a letter to the White House, and the more momentum we could get, the better. So go ahead and check those out. And Rachel, are you ready for questions? Okay, to field those questions, and keep them coming too. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, so we do have a few questions here. Someone wanted to know if they don't have a W-2 from their current employer, what could they do, because they just started working there in January?
Yeah, I think that it would be great to ask your employer directly if you're able to do that. There's also a website, guidestar.org. They keep a list of all the 990s that are, from different nonprofits. And so you could search your nonprofit by looking up, their name. And then once you find their 990, you can look up their EIN on that 990 form. And so those are like probably the easiest options for that person.
Thank you, Amy. And someone else asked a good question. They wanted to know if they received a Pell Grant back in 1997, would they still be eligible for the loan forgiveness?
Yeah, so if you received a Pell Grant at any time during your educational history, you'll be eligible for that $20,000 in debt relief that was announced a couple weeks ago. But I just want to remind people that these are two separate things. So PSLF is one thing, and then this debt relief, cancellation announcement is another thing, and both of them will require some paperwork on your end. So the PSLF program requires kind of all the paperwork that I just outlined, and then this debt relief announcement will also require an application that probably won't be out until early October. And you'll have until December 31st of 2023 to complete that application. Obviously, like the sooner the better that you can get it in. But so yes, basically a Pell Grant from any period of time throughout your education history will make you eligible for that $20,000 in cancellation.
Thank you, Amy. Another question, we got a few questions today.
Yeah,
Someone wanted to know if loans taken during the current academic year, which is 2022 to 2023, are those also considered for the loan forgiveness or cancellation?
I can double check on this. I believe that they had to have been dispersed by June 30th of this year, but I want yeah, I think they had to have been dispersed by June 30th of this year in order to be eligible.
Okay, so that would count as the current academic year. So that definitely answers that question.
Thank you.
That's really good to know. And another question we received are 501c organizations included?
So your
I think it was
organization
501c6 specifically.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it needs to be a 501c3 nonprofit. So I don't believe 501c3, 501c6 organizations would count. But if your organization is doing, you could always check in the PSLF help tool to see if it pops up when you run the search. And then, if your organization does certain types of work, so there's a list of this on studentaid.gov, but essentially it's like things like emergency services. If you're like in EMS or you're a firefighter or something like that, and maybe you're not a 501c3 for tax purposes, but you do that type of work, you could also be eligible for it. So I think the answer is no, they wouldn't qualify, but you could always check the PSLF help tool to see if your organization pops up with your EIN.
Okay, and the other question we got is, are there any strategies to get PSLF credit for the hours worked that show up on a 1099 as opposed to a W-2?
This is a great question. So unfortunately, any work that was done under a 1099 is not eligible for PSLF. Only, paid or employment, with the W-2 would be eligible for PSLF. And the same goes for, if you were contracted by a temp agency, and so you were working directly for the temp agency, but you also happen to be through that you were contracted by a nonprofit, that time also wouldn't count, because the thing that matters is really who's on your W-2. And so 1099 employees wouldn't be eligible, as well as, someone who was contracted by a temp agency to do that work.
That makes sense. And someone else asked, what if a previous employer doesn't respond to those certification requests?
Yeah, this is a great question. So there is that box that I mentioned on the first page of the form. So essentially when you get the form generated by the PSLF help tool, it'll have a first page, and then it'll have multiple pages depending on how many employers that you've had since 2007 or since October of 2007. And so the first page of the form you need to sign, and on that page will be a box that you're having trouble getting a signature or two. And if that's the case, you can check that box as kind of like a last resort. We don't like recommend doing that for everyone. You know, if you can get a signature, really try to get that signature. But if you're having trouble, you can check that box and then also submit a W-2 from that time period, you know, to verify that you worked there during that time, because the Department of Education will likely come back to you and say, we need, you know, verification that you worked there during that time. So it's submitting a W-2 at the same time is basically getting ahead of their question and, you know, perhaps expediting the process for you a bit.
Okay, and if someone worked for a nonprofit college that is since closed, how would they go about getting that employment verified?
So I think that's the same answer. So you could just
Same
check that box and then submit a W-2 as well to verify that you worked there.
Okay. Okay, and I think we had a few new ones that just came in. Let me double check here. Sorry, I have like a lot of screens. Okay. So, and I believe you may have just answered this, but you know, we just want to clarify. So is the cancellation program going to be as complex to qualify for the loan forgiveness, or do they just need the proof of income for that?
So our hope is that it's not as complex, right? Because it's pretty complex to apply for PSLF. So income should really be the only factor, so that once they're able to verify your income, it should be easy. But again, we don't have all the details on that. So, and they likely won't be out until a couple weeks from now. So I would just, you know, keep checking studentaid.gov, but also I'm sure you'll hear of it on the news that, you know, the application's out when you're able to apply. The hope is that it is not very complicated at all, and the Biden administration has alluded that it won't be that complicated. You know, so it shouldn't be, but you know, it's not out yet, so I can't really speak to that. Yeah.
And I believe this is the last question is, will payments toward a previous loan which has been paid off count towards the 120 payments needed to qualify?
So public service loan forgiveness is, you know, for loans that have a current balance. So if you've already paid off your loans, you couldn't, you know, kind of get like a refund on those. I'm not sure if that's totally the question they're asking though.
I think it is, you know, they want to know, like, I've already paid it off, so could that somehow count sort of towards 120? But your question, your answer definitely clarifies it, Amy.
Yeah.
If I may, I'm the one who asked the question. I have current loans now, so I didn't know if I could use payments for previous loans to count towards the 120 of the current loans that I will then have to be paying in the future.
Yeah, so it's a bit tricky because, you know, you can get retroactive credit right now under the waiver, right? And so it's possible that, I guess, you could get some of that time to count if you were also working in public service. But, you know, you wouldn't like get a refund for those payments. I think the answer to that is no. But it is a little bit tricky, I guess I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was the last question that we had come in, Amy.
Nice. We do have time for one more that just came through. So Lisa asked, can you share a specific link to the info that is currently available regarding Pell Grants and that interesting detail having received one long ago, qualifying a person for that $20,000 forgiveness now? So a little unclear in the question, but I think they're asking just info about the Pell Grant forgiveness thing that came up. Is that right, Lisa?
Yeah. I will share a link with you all that maybe you could share out after I'm trying to find it right now, but
yeah, Lisa, jump in if that's not what you're looking for.
Hi, Hi, thank you for this fantastic information. When you said that, I thought, okay, so I went through TC, I got my bachelor's a long time ago, I went through TC, got my master's here, blah, 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 blah. So when you said the thing about Pell Grant in the mists of time, I'm like, woo, I'm sure I would have received one back in the 80s. Is there a specific, that was an exciting piece of info to me. Where do you find that? I know you're mentioning that that is specific information of applying for that is coming out, so I'm on tenterhooks. But if there's info on us qualifying based on long ago, because my loans are for grad school, not from undergrad at this point. Paid those for a million years. Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
yeah, of course. So I can share our frequently asked questions. That actually pops up in our frequently asked questions. And some of that is, available like in written word, and some of it is not. Some of it is, things that we've learned, on the back end. And so I can share that with you, but then also, it's pretty clear in the announcement that it's like a Pell Grant from any period of time. And like, the cancellation announcement was really meant to rectify so many issues with the student loan system, but also level the playing field, right? And so they recognize that people with Pell Grants, should get more relief than others. And so, yeah, that's where I'm getting that information, I guess. But I can share both the debt relief announcement and then also our frequently asked questions so that you can kind of check those out. Yeah.
Nice. This is super exciting. It's been a long time coming. Your organization, Amy, has been keeping a close eye on all the changes, helping people understand how to be eligible for this. Just want to, again, thank you. If folks want to give Amy a round of applause virtually or or otherwise, that's appreciated. Thank you, Rachel, for fielding the questions, and for Denise for helping get the word out and being a partner in this. Just again, I just want to wrap up with these next steps. I'll put them right in the chat. Number one, we will share this information, of course, the video, the questions, the links Amy's got, and the slideshow shortly once we've got the video processed and everything. There are actually two other videos of this exact presentation. You might have different questions that come up from people throughout TC, so that's on the TC YouTube site under Take Action. Number two, get ready to vote. Again, I mentioned it, but super important. If you this is a nonpartisan, nonprofit endeavor hosted with the All In Campus Democracy Challenge, so I encourage you to sign up. And again, paying it forward to people who are students now and will be in the future who could benefit. We encourage you to write letters to let the White House know that this is something important to generations and to probably millions of educators and people in the nonprofit sector. So unless Denise or Rachel or Amy have anything to add, I think we will start to close up. So thank you again, and we'll be in touch with more information. Take care.
Thanks for having me.
Yep.